The day my own children arranged an intervention to discuss my unhealthy relationship with money was the day I realized I'd protected my secret for far too long. There, they sat in my modest living room, Robert with his designer watch catching the afternoon light, Jennifer scrolling through her phone between disapproving glances at my worn furniture. The irony wasn't lost on me as they complained about my embarrassing frugality, while sipping water from the same glass jars I'd been washing and reusing for decades. They had no idea that my outdated kitchen cabinets concealed financial documents worth more than both their homes combined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the day Thomas and I purchased our little bungalow on Maple Street. It was 1968, and at $15,000 it stretched our budget to its breaking point. Thomas had just secured his position at the Postal Service, and I was 3 years into teaching mathematics at Oak Ridge High. We were young, hopeful, and determined to build something meaningful together. "Ellie," Thomas had said as we stood in the empty living room, his arm around my waist, "this is our foundation. From here, we'll build a life that matters." Those words became our mantra through 52 years of marriage. While our friends upgraded to larger homes in newer neighborhoods, Thomas and I stayed put. We patched and repaired, painted and maintained. The mortgage was paid off by 1993, and we celebrated with a bottle of champagne on our back porch, the same modest concrete slab where we now sat on secondhand lawn chairs. Thomas was never flashy, but he was deliberate. Every financial decision was measured twice before cutting once, as he liked to say. We packed lunches, drove cars until they couldn't run anymore, and mended clothes until they couldn't be salvaged. Our vacations were camping trips to state parks or visits to family. Our children grew up understanding the value of $1, or so I thought. Robert came first, our serious boy with his father's analytical mind. Even as a child, he counted his allowance meticulously, recording every penny in a small notebook. Jennifer arrived 6 years later, bringing creative energy into our practical household. While different in temperament, both children thrived in our stable, if modest, environment. We managed to send them both to college without loans, a triumph. Of 2 decades of careful planning and disciplined saving. "Mom, please don't tell me you're reusing these tea bags again," Jennifer said one afternoon during her college years, watching me carefully hang 2 used bags to dry on the kitchen windowsill. "Why waste what still has value?" I replied. She rolled her eyes, a gesture that would become increasingly familiar over the years. After they graduated, both Robert and Jennifer seemed determined to live as differently from us as possible. Robert pursued a career in financial advising, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Jennifer entered marketing, eventually landing executive positions at prestigious firms. They married well. Diane and William both came from affluent backgrounds, and soon their lifestyles reflected their new social circles. I watched with quiet concern as they embraced a world of luxury cars, designer clothing, and lavish vacations. When Thomas questioned whether they were saving properly for retirement during a Sunday dinner, Robert laughed. "Dad, I'm a financial advisor. I think I know how to manage money." Thomas and I exchanged glances but said nothing more. We'd raised them with our values, but they had to make their own choices now. Thomas passed away 15 years ago, a sudden heart attack while tending to his vegetable garden. He was only 65. After the funeral, as I sat alone in our bedroom, I found a sealed envelope in his sock drawer with my name written in his precise handwriting. "My dearest Ellie," it began, "if you're reading this, I've left you too soon. Don't grieve too long. We've had a wonderful adventure together, haven't we? Now, about our project. I've left everything in order. The blue folder in the safe contains all the account numbers and instructions. Remember our promise. Whatever happens, stay the course. What we've built together is bigger than both of us now. Our project. The one we'd started after that heartbreaking visit to Children's Hospital in 1975, when Jennifer was just a toddler. She'd had pneumonia, terrifying days of high fever and labored breathing. In the bed next to hers was a little boy named Michael, fighting leukemia. His parents rarely visited, not from lack of caring, we learned, but because they couldn't afford to miss work. They lived 2 hours away and had 3 other children to support. Something's wrong with a world where parents have to choose between being with their sick child and putting food on the table for their other children, Thomas had said one night in the hospital cafeteria. That night, we made a decision that would shape the rest of our lives. We would live simply, not out of miserliness, but with purpose. We would save and invest not for ourselves, but for others facing impossible choices. The first donation was small, just $200 to help Michael's family with gas money so they could visit more often, but it was a beginning. Thomas, with his methodical approach to everything, created spreadsheets and investment plans. I continued teaching, eventually becoming department head, while he worked his way up to regional supervisor at the Postal Service. We weren't wealthy by any conventional standard, but we were careful, intentional. By the time Thomas died, our project had grown far beyond what either of us had imagined possible. I continued alone, funding scholarships, medical assistance programs, and community initiatives, all anonymously. The only person who knew was Martha, my oldest friend who helped me manage the paperwork as my arthritis worsened. "Ellie, don't. You think it's time to tell your children?" Martha asked one afternoon as we sorted through donation receipts at my kitchen table. "They should know the good you've done." I shook my head. Thomas and I agreed, no recognition. This was never about us. She sighed. "I'm not talking about public recognition. I'm talking about your children understanding who their parents really are." I considered her words, but ultimately set them aside. Robert and Jennifer had chosen different paths. Would knowing about our philanthropy change that? Or would they simply see it as money they could have inherited? As the years passed after Thomas's death, my relationship with my children grew increasingly strained. They couldn't understand why I continued to live so frugally when I could afford to enjoy life a little. Every visit became an opportunity for them to point out something that needed replacing or updating. "Mom, that refrigerator has to be from the 90s, Robert complained during a Sunday dinner. "It's probably costing you a fortune in electricity." "It keeps the food cold," I replied simply. "That's all I need it to do." Jennifer was more direct. "It's embarrassing, Mom. Do you know what Tyler's friends said when he brought them over last summer? They asked if you were having financial problems." My grandson Tyler had the grace to look uncomfortable. I didn't mind, Grandma. But the comments accumulated, wearing down my resolve. When I refused to replace my perfectly functional 15-year-old television, Robert suggested I might be suffering from depression or early dementia. When I continued to clip coupons despite having a comfortable teacher's pension, Jennifer accused me of having unhealthy anxiety about money. They couldn't see that every dollar saved was a dollar that could help someone truly in need. Last year alone, I had funded emergency medical treatments for 3 families, paid off student loans for 5 promising teachers who committed to working in underserved schools, and established a food program at the community center that fed dozens of seniors each week. The intervention in my living room was apparently the culmination of months of planning between my children and their spouses. "Mom, we're worried about you," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the gentle tone one might use with a confused child. "You're living like you're one step away from poverty when you don't need to." "Exactly," Robert added. "Your house is paid off. You have a pension and Social Security. There's no reason for you to deny yourself basic comforts at your age." Diane nodded emphatically. "We found mold in your bathroom last visit, Ellie. That's a health hazard." I've scheduled someone to come fix it next week, I said. What I didn't mention was that the someone was a young father I was helping get his contractor business off the ground. The bathroom would be completely renovated, but at a fraction of what my children would have insisted I pay. That's not enough, William interjected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We've been talking, and we think it's time to consider other living arrangements. My heart sank. What do you mean? Jennifer reached for my hand. There's a wonderful retirement community near us, Ridgewood Estates. They have beautiful apartments, activities, dining options. You wouldn't have to cook or clean or worry about maintenance. Or be isolated out here, Robert added. You'd have people your own age around. I'm not isolated, I protested. I have my book club, my volunteer work at the community center, my garden club. Low-cost activities that don't require spending money, Diane interrupted. That's the pattern we're concerned about, Ellie. I looked around at their concerned faces and felt a surge of frustration. They had constructed a narrative about me, the depressed, possibly cognitively declining elderly mother clinging to pennies out of fear or confusion, that couldn't be further from the truth. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. But I'm perfectly happy here. Mom? Robert's voice turned firm. We've already put down a deposit to hold a unit at Ridgewood. It's refundable for 30 days, but they don't often have openings. You need to at least go see it. The presumption took my breath away. You did what? It's for your own good, Jennifer insisted. The place is beautiful, and you could live comfortably there for years with your savings. Unless, she hesitated. Unless there's something you're not telling us about your finances? The question hung in the air. For a moment, I was tempted to reveal everything, the accounts, the investments, the millions we'd given away over the decades. Thomas and I had helped build a pediatric wing at the hospital, funded research into childhood diseases, established scholarship programs that had sent dozens of local students to college. All anonymously, all while living in our modest bungalow with its aging appliances and worn furniture. But I held my tongue. This wasn't how I wanted them to learn about our project. Not as an explanation for why they couldn't control my living situation. Not as a justification for my choices. My finances are in order, I said simply. And I'm not moving to Ridgewood Estates or anywhere else. Robert sighed heavily. Mom, be reasonable. This house is falling apart around you. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be. And frankly, your stubborn refusal to spend money on basic necessities is becoming a problem. A problem for whom? I asked. For you, Jennifer exclaimed. And yes, for us too. Do you know how it feels to have friends over for dinner and have them ask why my mother lives like she's in poverty when I have a perfectly good guest house she could move into? And there it was, the real issue. My lifestyle was an embarrassment to them. My choices reflected poorly on their carefully curated images. I see, I said quietly. This isn't about my well-being at all, is it? That's not fair, Robert protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. We're worried about you. No. I stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my 80 years. You're worried about how I reflect on you. You're worried about what your friends think. You're worried about appearances. Mom, Jennifer started. I think it's time for you all to leave, I said. I appreciate the visit, but I'm tired. Now. They exchanged glances, clearly not having anticipated this outcome. We're not done discussing this, Robert warned as they gathered their things. Actually, we are, I replied. This is my home, my life, and my decision. After they left, I sat alone in my quiet living room, Thomas's photograph watching me from the mantel. Had we made a mistake keeping our charitable work secret for so long? Had our choice to live simply without explanation created this gulf between us and our children? I picked up the phone and called Martha. "They tried to move me to a retirement home," I said when she answered. Martha's laugh was gentle. "And how did that go for them?" "About as well as you'd expect," I sighed. "But Martha, I'm starting to think you were right. Maybe it is time they knew." "Well, it's about time," she replied. "The Founders' Day celebration is next weekend. Didn't Gabriel say they wanted to recognize the anonymous donors this year?" The Oak Ridge Community Foundation had been trying to publicly thank their major anonymous benefactors for years. Thomas and I had always declined, but perhaps now. "I'll think about it," I promised. After hanging up, I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, reusing yesterday's tea bag as I always did. Not out of necessity, but out of habit, and because every small economy meant another dollar that could do real good in the world. My children saw only the surface of my choices. They couldn't see the purpose beneath. But perhaps it was time they did. The week following my children's intervention passed in a blur of routine activities that now felt charged with new significance. Each time I darned a sock instead of buying new ones, each time I carefully portioned leftovers into reusable containers, each time I walked the mile to the grocery store instead of driving, I found myself wondering how my children would view these actions if they knew the truth behind them. I was harvesting tomatoes from my backyard garden when Martha's ancient Buick pulled into my driveway. She emerged holding a folder and wearing a determined expression I recognized all too well. "I brought the foundation papers for you to sign," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries as she followed me into the kitchen. "Gabriel needs them by tomorrow if they're going to include the announcement in the Founders' Day program." I set the basket of tomatoes on the counter and wiped. My hands on my apron. "I still haven't decided, Martha." She fixed me with the same stern look she'd used since we were schoolgirls together. "Eleanor Thompson, you've been hiding your light under a bushel for 50 years. Thomas might have been content with anonymity, but he's been gone for 15 years now. Don't you think it's time?" I busied myself washing the tomatoes, buying time. What if it changes everything? What if Robert and Jennifer only see dollar signs instead of understanding what we were trying to accomplish? Martha settled at my kitchen table, her arthritis making the process slower than it once was. "They're not children anymore, Ellie. They're adults with children of their own. Give them the chance to rise to the occasion. And if they don't, then at least you'll know," she said simply. "Either way, this secrecy has created a wall between you. They think you're stubborn and miserly. You think they're shallow and materialistic. Maybe you're both wrong." I dried my hands and joined her at the table, pulling the foundation papers toward me. The Oak Ridge Community Foundation wanted to recognize the Thompson Family Trust for its decades of contributions that had helped build the pediatric wing at the hospital, funded the community center, established scholarship programs, and supported countless families through medical and financial crises. "What would Thomas say?" I mused. Martha smiled gently. "He'd say exactly what he always said, that it was your decision too, not just his. You've carried on his legacy beautifully, Ellie, but you're allowed to make your own choices now." With a deep breath, I signed the authorization form allowing the foundation to publicly acknowledge our contributions at the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. "There," I said, pushing the papers back toward Martha. "It's done. Will you tell Robert and Jennifer beforehand, or let them find out with everyone else?" I considered the question. I think they should hear it from me first, but not yet. I need to prepare. After Martha left, I spent the afternoon in what Robert and Jennifer called my time capsule office, the small second bedroom where Thomas and I had tracked our finances and charitable work for decades. The outdated desktop computer still functioned perfectly well for my needs, and the filing cabinets contained neatly organized records of every donation, every investment, every decision we'd made together. I pulled out the blue folder Thomas had mentioned in his final letter to me. Inside were account statements, trust documents, and a handwritten journal detailing our project from its inception. I hadn't looked at these papers in years. Martha helped me manage the day-to-day operations now, and I found myself moved by Thomas's precise handwriting, his thoughtful notes, his vision for what we could accomplish together. Ellie's idea. Today, one entry from 1987 read, "Establish an emergency fund for teachers to access classroom supplies. Initial funding, $10,000. Anonymous, as always. She sees what the other teachers at her school struggle with. This is personal for her." I remembered that conversation vividly. We'd sat on our back porch drinking lemonade, discussing how many of my colleagues purchased supplies with their own limited salaries. The emergency fund still existed, having grown to over $100,000 over the decades. Hundreds of Oak Ridge teachers had benefited from it without ever knowing where the money came from. Another entry from 1992. Expanded the scholarship program today. Now includes trade schools and community colleges, not just universities. Ellie pointed out not everyone needs or wants a 4-year degree. Smart woman. Initial expansion funding, $25,000. I smiled, remembering Thomas's enthusiasm for education, in all its forms. Neither of us had come from families that valued higher education. We'd both worked our way through college, me at the state university, Thomas taking night classes for years to earn his business degree. We understood the barriers that talented students faced. Page after page documented our journey, the careful investments, the strategic giving, the lives touched. By my calculations, over the past 50 years, we had donated more than $8 million to various causes, all while living on modest salaries in our modest home with our modest possessions. What would my children think when they learned the truth? Would they understand, or would they feel cheated out of an inheritance they never knew existed? The Founders' Day celebration was scheduled for Saturday, just 5 days away. I needed to speak with Robert and Jennifer before then, but I wanted to choose the moment carefully. Sunday dinner at my house seemed the most appropriate setting, neutral territory where we could have privacy. I picked up the phone and dialed Jennifer's number first. "Mom?" She sounded surprised. I rarely called during work hours. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I was just wondering if you and William and the children would be available for dinner at my house this Sunday. I'm inviting Robert's family, too." There was a pause. "Is this about the retirement community? Because if it is..." "It's not," I interrupted. "I'd just like to have everyone together for a family dinner. It's been a while." Another pause. "Okay. Should we bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I said. "I'll take care of everything else." Robert was more direct when I called him. "What's this about, Mom? Jennifer texted me that you're planning some kind of family dinner." "Can't a mother want to see her family?" I asked mildly. "Of course, but the timing seems suspect. We just had that conversation about your living situation, and now suddenly you want everyone together?" I sighed. "Robert, I'm not moving to Ridgewood Estates or anywhere else. But yes, I do have something I'd like to discuss with everyone. It's important to me." He seemed to consider this. "Fine, we'll be there. What time?" After making the arrangements, I sat back in my chair, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. For 50 years, Thomas and I had guarded our secret, finding joy in anonymous giving. Now I was about to bring that era to an end. Would it be liberating or devastating? Would my children finally understand me? Or would this create an even wider gulf between us? The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, not to impress my children, but because the activity helped calm my nerves. I planned a menu of comfort foods that had been family favorites when Robert and Jennifer were growing up. Pot roast with root vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. Simple food made with care, just as Thomas and I had always preferred. On Saturday, I received a call from Gabriel at the foundation. "Mrs. Thompson? I just wanted to confirm that you'll be attending the ceremony tomorrow. We've arranged for special seating for you and any family members who might accompany you." I hadn't considered this aspect. "Thank you, Gabriel. I'll be there, but I'm not sure about my family yet. I'm speaking with them tonight." "Of course," he said warmly. "However many attend, we'll be ready. And Mrs. Thompson? On behalf of the entire foundation, I want to express our deepest gratitude. What you and your late husband have done for this community is extraordinary." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, but we only did what we felt was right." "That's what makes it extraordinary," he replied. "Most people don't." By Sunday afternoon, my house was filled with the aromas of slow-cooked beef and baking bread. I'd set the dining room table with my everyday dishes, no point in pretending to be something I wasn't now, but added a tablecloth and fresh flowers from my garden as a small concession to the occasion's importance. Robert's family arrived, first precisely at 5 o'clock. Diane immediately noticed the renovated bathroom, running her designer-ringed fingers along the new tile work. "This is actually quite nice," she admitted, sounding surprised. "Who did the work?" "A local contractor," I said. "Miguel Rodriguez. He's just starting his own business." Robert inspected it with a critical eye. "Decent workmanship. What did he charge you?" I smiled. "A fair price. My grandchildren, Megan and Lucas, were typically absorbed in their phones, barely offering perfunctory hugs before asking about the Wi-Fi password. I didn't mind. Teenagers had always been teenagers. Jennifer's family arrived 20 minutes late, as was their custom. William made a show of bringing an expensive bottle of wine, which I accepted graciously, though I rarely drank. Their children, Tyler and Zoe, were more affectionate than their cousins, though I could see Zoe's eyes taking in the modest surroundings with thinly veiled concern. "Grandma, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice carrying that same careful tone her mother had used during the intervention. At 17, she was already mimicking her parents' attitudes. "I'm perfectly well, dear," I assured her. "Help me bring the food to the table, won't you?" Dinner began smoothly enough. The food was well received. My cooking skills were one thing my children had never criticized, and conversation flowed around safe topics: the grandchildren's activities, Robert's recent business trip, Jennifer's new marketing campaign. I waited until everyone had been served dessert before clearing my throat. "I wanted to gather everyone together tonight because I have something important to share with you all," I began. Immediately, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Robert and Jennifer exchanged glances. William set down his wine glass. The grandchildren, sensing adult tension, looked up from their devices. "As you know," I continued, "your father and I always lived simply. You've often questioned our choices, especially in recent years. You've called me frugal, cheap, even irrational about money." "Mom, we're concerned about your quality of life," Jennifer interjected. "That's all." I held up a hand. "Please let me finish. There's a reason for the choices your father and I made. A purpose that goes beyond fear or miserliness or whatever you've imagined." I reached beside me for the blue folder I'd placed on an empty chair, opening it to reveal the documents inside. In 1975, when Jennifer was hospitalized with pneumonia, your father and I met a family whose child was battling leukemia. They lived hours away and could barely afford to visit him because they couldn't miss work or pay for the gas. That experience changed us. We decided then that we would live simply not because we had to, but because we chose to, so that we could help families like theirs. Robert frowned. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that for the past 50 years, your father and I have been anonymous philanthropists in this community. We've established trusts, funded scholarships, built wings of the hospital, supported families in crisis, all while living in this house, driving used cars, and yes, reusing tea bags. The silence that followed was profound. Jennifer's mouth had fallen slightly open. Robert stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "That's not possible," Diane finally said. "On a teacher's salary and postal worker's pay? That doesn't add up." I smiled. "Your father was remarkably good with investments, and living on less than half our income for decades allowed those investments to grow substantially." I pulled out the trust statements and passed them around the table. The most recent one showed a balance of just over $12 million. $12 million? Robert's voice was barely a whisper. The financial advisor was clearly struggling to reconcile this figure with his perception of his frugal parents. "Currently," I confirmed, "we've already donated approximately $8 million over the years, all anonymously, until now." "Until now?" Jennifer repeated. "What does that mean?" "Tomorrow at the Founders' Day celebration, the Oak Ridge Community Foundation will be publicly acknowledging the Thompson Family Trust for its contributions to the community. I've finally given them permission to do so." William set down the papers he'd been examining. "Why now, after all these years of secrecy?" I looked around at their bewildered faces. "Because I'm tired of being misunderstood by my own children. Because I want you to know that your father and I weren't cheap or afraid or irrational. We had purpose. We made a difference." "But why didn't you tell us?" Jennifer's voice trembled slightly. "All these years, we thought." "We thought you were just stubborn," Robert finished for her. "That you were stuck in old habits, refusing to enjoy your retirement." I sighed. "At first, the anonymity was important to us. We didn't want recognition or gratitude. And then, as you grew older and began to embrace such different values, I worried you wouldn't understand." "Different values?" Jennifer's tone sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said gently, "that you both chose paths very different from ours. You prioritized appearances, status, material comfort. There's nothing inherently wrong with those choices, but they are fundamentally different from the choices your father and I made." Tyler, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "So all this time when people thought you were just a retired teacher living on a pension, you were actually secretly funding half the town?" I smiled at my eldest grandchild. "Not half the town, but yes, we helped where we could." "That's actually pretty badass, Grandma," he said, earning a sharp look from his mother. "Language, Tyler," Jennifer admonished, though her heart didn't seem in it. She was still staring at the financial statements in front of her. Robert seemed to be processing the information differently, his analytical mind already calculating. Implications. These trusts are set up to continue charitable giving in perpetuity. There's no provision for inheritance. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "That's correct. Your father and I always intended for this money to continue, helping others, not to be passed down as family wealth. So you're telling us there's $12 million that you've been sitting on, living like you're counting pennies, and none of it will ever come to your actual family?" Diane's voice had risen an octave. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm telling you that your father-in-law and I created something meaningful that has helped hundreds of people in this community, and will continue to do so long after I'm gone. The trusts are irrevocable, Diane. The money isn't mine to pass down even if I wanted to." William, ever the lawyer, was examining the documents closely. "These are incredibly sophisticated charitable vehicles. The structure is impressive." "Your father had help from good advisors," I acknowledged. "But the vision was ours." "I still don't understand why you kept it a secret from us," Jennifer insisted. "Did you think we'd try to talk you out of it? That we'd want the money for ourselves?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Would they have? Given their reaction now, I wasn't certain. "We wanted you to develop your own relationship with money and giving without the shadow of our choices," I explained. And as you grew older, the gulf between our values seemed to widen. You became so focused on appearances, on what others thought. That's not fair, Robert protested. We've worked hard for what we have. Of course you have, I agreed. I've never doubted your work ethic. But somewhere along the way, you began to see my continued simple lifestyle as an embarrassment, a problem to be fixed rather than a choice to be respected. Jennifer had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were worried about you. Were you? I asked gently. Or were you worried about how my choices reflected on you? The painful silence that followed suggested I had touched a nerve. Zoe suddenly pushed back from the table. I think what Grandma did is amazing, she announced. Everyone else is just upset because they can't get their hands on the money. Zoe, Jennifer exclaimed. That's completely inappropriate. Is it? Zoe challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what's happening. Grandma and Grandpa helped build a children's wing at the hospital, and instead of being proud, you're all acting like she stole something from you. I hadn't expected my 17-year-old granddaughter to be my defender, but her words warmed my heart. Perhaps the family values Thomas and I had tried to instill hadn't skipped a generation after all. No one is saying we're not proud, William said smoothly, ever the diplomat. It's just a shock, that's all. Finding out your mother has been a secret philanthropist for 5 decades isn't exactly an everyday occurrence. Robert was still studying the financial statements. Some of these donations are substantial, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, all while you were darning socks and refusing to replace appliances. Yes, I said simply. That was the point. Every small economy at home meant another child who could receive medical treatment, another student who could attend college, another family who could keep their home during a crisis. Megan, who had been scrolling through her phone during much of the conversation, suddenly gasped, "Oh my God, is this you, Grandma?" She turned her screen toward me, showing a local news article from the Foundation's website. Eleanor Thompson, longtime anonymous benefactor of Oak Ridge Community Foundation, to be honored at Founders Day celebration. Yes, I confirmed. That's why I wanted to tell you all tonight, before it becomes public knowledge tomorrow. Wait, Jennifer said, pulling out her own phone and finding the article. This says you've donated millions to the pediatric oncology wing at Oak Ridge Children's Hospital. That's where Dr. Reeves treated me when I was little. Yes, I said. After your pneumonia, we became very interested in supporting children's health initiatives. Dr. Reeves was just starting her career then. The grant that funded her research fellowship came from our trust. Jennifer looked stunned. Dr. Reeves is now chief of pediatrics. Her treatment protocols for childhood leukemia have saved thousands of lives. I know, I said softly. Your father was very proud of that particular investment. The room fell quiet again as my family struggled to reconcile the mother and grandmother they thought they knew with the woman sitting before them now. I could almost see them mentally reviewing every interaction, every frugal choice, every refused indulgence through this new lens. Lucas, Robert's 15-year-old son who rarely spoke at family gatherings, suddenly broke the silence. Is that why you never let us buy you things, Grandma? Because you didn't want to waste money that could help other people? His simple question cut through the tension. I smiled at him. Partly. And partly because I truly don't need more things. I have enough. Enough, Robert repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. I don't think I've ever heard anyone in my social circle use that word about possessions. That's rather sad, isn't it? I observed. Diane was still fixated on the financial aspects. But surely you could have set aside something for your grandchildren's education at least, instead of giving everything to strangers. I looked at her steadily. Robert and Jennifer both have successful careers and have provided well for their children. The families we've helped couldn't afford basic necessities. let alone college tuition. Our resources went where they were needed most. Besides, Zoe interjected again, I've already got scholarships lined up. I don't need Grandma's money. I'd rather see it help someone who has nothing. Jennifer looked at her daughter with surprise, as if seeing her in a new light. William cleared his throat. Eleanor, I think what everyone is trying to process is not just the philanthropy itself, which is admirable, but the fact that you chose to keep it hidden from your family for so long. It suggests a certain lack of trust. I considered his words carefully. Perhaps. Or perhaps it suggests I understood my children's values all too well. The statement hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniable. The tension was broken by the sound of Tyler's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen and excused himself to take the call. The foundation ceremony is tomorrow at noon, I said into the awkward silence. You're all welcome to attend, though I understand if you have other commitments. Of course we'll be there, Jennifer said quickly, though I noted she didn't check with William before making the commitment. Robert nodded slowly. Yes, we'll be there too. He paused, then added, I'm sorry, Mom, for the intervention, for pushing the retirement community. I didn't understand. I know, I said gently. How could you? I never gave you the chance to understand. Tyler returned, his expression excited. Grandma, that was Kyle from the community center. He says they're putting together a video for tomorrow's ceremony with testimonials from people who've benefited from your donations. He asked if I'd help film it since I'm majoring in media studies. Is that okay? I smiled, touched by his enthusiasm. Of course, if you'd like to. Like to? It's my grandmother being honored as a secret philanthropist. This is literally the coolest thing that's happened in this family, ever. His genuine excitement seemed to shift the mood. Suddenly, my grandchildren were full of questions. Which scholarships had I funded? Did I know specific families we'd helped? Had famous people ever donated to the same causes? As I answered their questions, I watched Robert and Jennifer exchange glances across the table. They were still processing, still recalibrating their understanding of their parents and the values that had shaped our family. It wouldn't happen overnight, but perhaps this revelation was the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. The conversation continued long into the evening, moving from the dining room to the living room as we looked through photo albums and documents that chronicled our project over the decades. By the time my family prepared to leave, the initial shock had given way to a complex mixture of emotions: lingering confusion, dawning respect, and perhaps a touch of self-reflection. Jennifer hugged me at the door, holding on longer than usual. Mom, I don't know what to say. I've been so wrong about you. Not wrong, I corrected gently. You just didn't have all the information. But I made assumptions. We all did. She pulled back to look at me. Why didn't you defend yourself when we criticized your choices? I smiled. Because I didn't need to justify myself to anyone. Your father and I knew what we were doing and why. That was enough. After everyone had left, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, Thomas's photograph in my hands. Well, old friend, I whispered, the secret's out. What do you think of that? I could almost hear his gentle laugh, see the twinkle in his eye. He'd always said that someday our children would understand that we should trust them with the truth. Perhaps he'd been right all along. Tomorrow would bring public recognition we'd never sought, but tonight had brought something far more valuable, the beginning of true understanding between generations. Outside my window, the stars shone brightly over Oak Ridge, the same stars that had witnessed 5 decades of quiet giving, of purpose-driven frugality, of a legacy built not on accumulation, but on distribution. Whatever tomorrow brought, that legacy would endure. I slept poorly that night, my mind replaying the expressions on my children's faces as they grappled with the truth. Disappointment, confusion, calculation, and perhaps, though I might have been projecting my own hopes, the first glimmers of understanding. I rose before dawn, standing at my kitchen window with a cup of tea as the first hints of light touched the eastern sky. Today would bring a public acknowledgement I had never sought, a recognition that felt both validating and uncomfortable. Martha called just after 7. "Well, how did it go with the family?" "About as well as could be expected," I replied. Shock, mostly. Some pointed questions about why they weren't in line for an inheritance. Martha snorted. "Predictable. Will they be at the ceremony today?" "They say they will." I paused. "Martha, am I doing the right thing?" Thomas and I always agreed on anonymity. It feels almost like a betrayal. Her voice softened. "Ellie, do you remember what Thomas said when you established the pediatric oncology fellowship? About how someday your story might inspire others?" I did remember. It had been one of our rare disagreements about the project. I had insisted on complete anonymity. Thomas had argued that eventually our example might encourage others to give. "People need models," he'd said. "Not everyone imagines this path on their own." He was thinking ahead, Martha continued, just as he always did. Maybe this is exactly the right time for your story to inspire others, including your own children. After we hung up, I dressed carefully for the ceremony in one of my few good outfits, a simple navy blue dress I'd purchased years ago for a faculty retirement dinner. I added Thomas's mother's pearl necklace, the one item of jewelry I regularly wore, and surveyed myself in the mirror. I looked like exactly what I was. An 80-year-old former schoolteacher with modest tastes and simple habits. Nothing about my appearance suggested a woman who had directed millions of dollars toward community needs over 5 decades. My doorbell rang at 10:30. To my surprise, all 4 of my grandchildren stood on the porch. "We thought you might like a ride to the ceremony, Grandma," Tyler announced with a grin. "We've got my car all cleaned up for the occasion." I was touched by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful. I was just going to take the bus." Zoe rolled her eyes. "Grandma, you're literally the guest of honor. You can't take the bus." "I've been taking the bus for 60 years, I pointed out mildly. "But I appreciate the ride. Will your parents meet us there?" "They're already at the park helping set up," Megan explained. "Mom's organizing the reception refreshments, and Dad's talking with the foundation people about investment strategies or something." This was unexpected. Jennifer and Robert were actively participating, not just attending. "And Uncle William is reviewing some legal documents for the foundation director," Lucas added. "Aunt Diane is, well, she's telling everyone how to arrange the flowers." I couldn't help but smile. My family was nothing if not consistent in applying their particular talents, even in unfamiliar circumstances. Tyler's cleaned-up car turned out to be a well-used sedan with empty coffee cups still littering the back seat, but the gesture was what mattered. As we drove toward the Central Park where the Founders' Day celebration was held annually, felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. For decades, Thomas and I had operated quietly in the background, taking satisfaction in results rather than recognition. Today would change that forever. Central Park was already crowded when we arrived, families spreading blankets on the grass, children racing between food vendors, local politicians shaking hands and distributing campaign materials. The community foundation had set up a stage near the central pavilion with rows of chairs arranged in front. Gabriel spotted me immediately and hurried over. "Mrs. Thompson? We were just wondering when you'd arrive." He turned to my grandchildren with a warm smile. "And you must be the Thompson grandchildren. We're so pleased you could join us today." Tyler puffed up visibly at being recognized. "We're filming testimonials for the video presentation. Kyle has us set up over by the oak grove." Gabriel nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Mrs. Thompson, we have a seat reserved for you in the front row. The presentation will begin at noon, after the mayor's welcome address. Would you like some refreshments while you wait? I allowed Gabriel to lead me toward the stage area, my grandchildren peeling off toward the oak grove with their filming equipment. As we approached, I spotted Robert deep in conversation with the foundation's financial director, gesturing animatedly as he made some point about investment strategies. Nearby, Jennifer was directing volunteers in the arrangement of a refreshment table, her marketing expertise evident in the attractive display. William stood off to one side with legal documents spread across a portable table, while Diane was indeed rearranging flower arrangements with authoritative precision. My family had arrived barely 12 hours after learning about my philanthropic activities, and already they had inserted themselves into the operations, applying their professional skills with characteristic confidence. I wasn't sure whether to be amused or concerned by their rapid involvement. "Eleanor, there you are." Martha approached, elegant in her best church dress, a corsage pinned to her lapel. She followed my gaze to where my children worked. Well, they certainly didn't waste any time jumping in, did they? They've always been enthusiastic, I said diplomatically. Martha snorted. That's one word for it. Come on, Gabriel has coffee and pastries set up for the special guests. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Foundation board members, community leaders, and program directors from various recipient organizations stopped by to express their gratitude. Many were people I'd known for years in other contexts, fellow teachers, neighbors, parents of my students, who had never known about my connection to the programs that had benefited them or their institutions. "Eleanor, I had no idea," said Harriet Wilson, the longtime librarian at Oak Ridge High School. "The summer reading program funded by your trust has brought thousands of books to children who wouldn't have access otherwise. Why didn't you ever say anything?" I smiled. "It wasn't about recognition, Harriet. It was about the results." Still, she pressed my hand warmly. "Thank you, truly." As noon approached, Gabriel guided me to my seat in the front row. To my surprise, Robert, Jennifer, and their families joined me, arranging themselves in the row directly behind mine. Jennifer leaned forward to squeeze my shoulder. "The testimonial video is incredible, Mom," she whispered. "Tyler and Zoe did an amazing job collecting stories. Wait until you see it." Before I could respond, the mayor approached the podium and called for attention. After a brief welcome and acknowledgement of the annual Founders' Day traditions, he turned toward more specific recognition. "Today we have a special presentation from the Oak Ridge Community Foundation. I'd like to invite Gabriel Morales to the stage." Gabriel took the podium with a warm smile. "Thank you, Mayor Chen. For over 50 years, the Oak Ridge Community Foundation has been privileged to partner with generous donors in addressing the needs of our community. Today, we are honored to publicly recognize a family whose extraordinary generosity has transformed countless lives while remaining anonymous until now." He gestured toward the large screen set up beside the stage. "Before I invite our honoree to the stage, I'd like to share a video that captures just a small fraction of the impact the Thompson Family Trust has had on our community." The screen came to life with images of the Oak Ridge Children's Hospital, focusing on the pediatric oncology wing. Dr. Reeves, now in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, appeared on screen. "The initial grant that brought me to Oak Ridge came from an anonymous donor," she explained. "That same donor later funded our research fellowship program, which has trained over 30 pediatric oncologists and led to treatment protocols now used worldwide. Today, children who would have had less than a 20% survival rate 50 years ago now have an 85% chance of full recovery." The video continued with testimonials from scholarship recipients, families, who had received emergency assistance, community center directors, and program participants. Many told emotional stories of how these programs had changed the trajectory of their lives. A middle-aged man identified as Michael Rodriguez appeared on screen, his expression serious. "When I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. My parents lived 2 hours away and couldn't afford to visit often because they had other children at home and couldn't miss work. An anonymous donor provided gas cards, meal vouchers, and eventually helped establish the family housing program at the hospital so parents could stay with their sick children. I wouldn't be alive today without the medical treatment I received, but I might not have had the will to fight without my family there beside me. I gasped softly. This was Michael, the little boy from the adjacent hospital bed all those years ago, the child whose family's struggle had inspired our project in the first place. The video shifted to show the community center, where a teenage girl spoke directly to the camera. The music program, funded by the Thompson Trust, gave me access to instruments and lessons I could never have afforded. Now I'm headed to Juilliard, on a full scholarship. I never knew who to thank until now. As the testimonials continued, I felt tears welling in my eyes. Thomas and I had never sought this kind of feedback, never wanted recognition or gratitude. We had simply identified needs and tried to address them, taking quiet satisfaction in statistics and progress reports rather than personal acknowledgement. Hearing these individual stories, seeing the faces of people whose lives had been changed, was overwhelming in a way I hadn't anticipated. The screen finally darkened, and Gabriel returned to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, the impact you've just witnessed represents only a fraction of the legacy created by Eleanor and Thomas Thompson. Through careful financial planning and deliberate choice to live simply, this couple, a school teacher and a postal worker, managed to donate over $8 million to community causes while maintaining complete anonymity. Today, we are honored to publicly recognize Eleanor Thompson for her extraordinary generosity and vision. The applause was thunderous as Gabriel gestured for me to join him on stage. Martha gave me a gentle nudge, and I rose on slightly unsteady legs to make my way up the steps. The faces in the crowd were a blur, though I could make out my family in the front rows, watching with expressions I couldn't quite interpret. Mrs. Thompson, Gabriel said, presenting me with a crystal plaque. On behalf of the Oak Ridge community, foundation, and the countless lives you've touched, we thank you for your unparalleled generosity and humble spirit. The applause swelled again. I hadn't prepared remarks, hadn't really believed this moment would come, but as I looked out over the gathering, words seemed to form themselves. Thank you, I began simply. This recognition was never something my husband Thomas and I sought. In fact, we actively avoided it for 50 years. This drew a gentle laugh from the crowd. We believed that giving should be done quietly, without expectation of gratitude or acknowledgement. We didn't have extraordinary resources, just ordinary. Salaries and a commitment to living below our means so that we could share with others. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Many have asked why we chose to live so simply when we could have afforded more comfort. The answer is also simple. We had enough for our needs, enough to be content. And we discovered that enough is a powerful concept. It freed us to share whatever was beyond enough with others who had far less. My eyes found my children in the audience. Robert was watching intently, his expression unreadable. Jennifer was wiping tears from her cheeks. The decision to go public with our giving was difficult. Thomas is no longer with us, but I believe he would approve of sharing our story now, not for recognition, but in the hope that it might inspire others. You don't need to be wealthy to make a significant difference. You just need to decide what enough means for you, and then find purpose for whatever remains. As I returned to my seat amid renewed applause, Gabriel announced that the foundation was establishing the Thomas and Eleanor Thompson Legacy Fund, inviting additional contributions to continue the work we had begun. I was barely listening, focused instead on the strange mixture of emotions coursing through me. Pride in what Thomas and I had accomplished, gratitude for the opportunity to have made a difference, uncertainty about how this public recognition would change things. The ceremony concluded with the mayor presenting a key to the city, another honor I had never sought. As people began to disperse toward the food vendors and other Founders Day activities, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, many sharing personal stories of how programs we had funded had touched their lives. It was overwhelming, this sudden shift from anonymity to celebrity in my small community. Finally, Martha appeared at my elbow. "You need a break from all this attention," she announced firmly, guiding me toward a quiet bench beneath an oak tree. "How are you holding up?" I sank onto the bench gratefully. It's a lot to process. "I keep thinking about what Thomas would say." "He'd be proud," Martha said without hesitation, "of the work you've done together and of your courage in sharing it now." She nodded toward where my family stood talking with Gabriel and other Foundation officials. "And what about them? How are they handling it?" I watched my children and their spouses, now deeply engaged with the Foundation leadership. They seemed to be inserting themselves into the operation rather efficiently. Martha snorted. "I noticed. Robert's already reorganizing the investment strategy, and Jennifer's talking about rebranding the Foundation's public image. William's reviewing all the legal structures, and Diane's, well, being Diane. They're applying their skills," I said mildly. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." "As long as they respect the vision you and Thomas established," Martha replied. "I know your children, Ellie. They tend to take over whatever they touch." Before I could respond, Tyler approached. With his camera. "Grandma, could I get an interview with you for the Foundation's archive? They want to document your perspective for future generations." I smiled at my grandson's enthusiasm. "Of course, Tyler." As he set up his equipment, more people approached to express their gratitude or share stories. One elderly man gripped my hand tightly. "Mrs. Thompson, the emergency medical fund you established saved my wife's life 15 years ago when we couldn't afford her cancer treatments. She's still with me today because of you." A middle-aged woman introduced herself as a former recipient of the teacher's scholarship. "I've been teaching at Oak Ridge Elementary for 25 years now. Your support made that possible. I've tried to pay it forward by mentoring new teachers and advocating for education funding." By the time Tyler was ready for the interview, I felt emotionally drained but also strangely energized by these encounters. He positioned his camera and asked thoughtful questions about what had inspired our philanthropy, how we had managed it practically, and what advice I would give to others interested in charitable giving. "The key is to start where you are," I told him. Thomas and I began with very small donations, gas cards for families traveling to the hospital, grocery gift certificates for struggling teachers, books for the library. As our investments grew, so did our giving. But the principle remained the same: live on less than you earn, and direct the rest toward purposes that matter to you. Tyler nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "Did you ever wish you had spent more on yourselves? Traveled more, or lived in a bigger house?" I considered the question carefully. There were moments, particularly when your parents were teenagers and so conscious of appearances. They felt embarrassed sometimes by our modest home and cars. But Thomas and I found genuine contentment in our choices. We traveled locally, enjoyed simple pleasures, and took deep satisfaction in the impact of our giving. I wouldn't trade that for any luxury. "One last question, Grandma," Tyler said. "What do you hope happens next? Now that everyone knows about your philanthropy?" I hadn't really considered this. What did I hope would come from this revelation? I hope people understand that extraordinary impact can come from ordinary lives lived with purpose, I said finally. And personally, I hope my family might see our choices in a new light, not as deprivation or eccentricity, but as deliberate purpose. As Tyler packed up his equipment, I noticed Robert approaching, his expression thoughtful. He sat beside me on the bench. "Mom, I've been talking with the Foundation's financial director. The investment strategy you and Dad implemented was remarkably sophisticated for non-professionals. Who advised you?" I smiled. Initially, just books from the library and subscription to financial newsletters. Later, we worked with Martin Friedman at First Community Trust. He's retired now, but he helped us establish the more complex trusts. Robert nodded slowly. The diversification is impressive. International holdings, municipal bonds, value stocks. It's a textbook example of long-term growth strategy. Your father was methodical about research, I explained. He would spend hours at the library studying financial journals, taking notes, making projections. When something interested him, he pursued it thoroughly. I never knew that about him, Robert admitted. I always thought of Dad as, well, overcautious, afraid to take risks. I shook my head. Not afraid, deliberate. He wasn't risk-averse, just very clear about which risks were worth taking and why. The trust actually includes some quite speculative investments, but they're balanced with more conservative holdings. Robert looked genuinely surprised. I saw those. Early investments in technology companies that paid off dramatically. I assumed they were recommended by an advisor. Some were, I acknowledged. But others were your father's research. He spotted trends early. Personal computing, mobile technology, renewable energy. He didn't have formal training, but he had remarkable intuition and patience. Robert was quiet for a moment. I think I misjudged him. Both of you, really. He paused. I always thought you lived frugally because you were afraid of running out of money. I never imagined there was this whole other purpose behind it. We could have explained, I admitted. But we were private people, and over time, it became easier to let you believe what you wanted than to justify our choices. I wish you had told us, Robert said quietly. All those years I spent thinking you were just stuck in old habits, unwilling to enjoy life. We did enjoy life, Robert, just not in ways you recognized or valued. He nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see that. Jennifer joined us, sitting on my other side. Mom, the foundation wants to feature your story in their next fundraising campaign. They think it could inspire a whole new approach to community giving. The idea that ordinary people can make extraordinary impact through intentional living and strategic giving. I'm not sure how I feel about becoming a poster child for philanthropy, I admitted. This was never about recognition. I know, Jennifer said, surprising me with her understanding. But your story is powerful precisely because you never sought recognition. You and Dad didn't give to get your names on buildings or recognition at charity galas. You gave because you saw needs and had the means to address them. That's a different model of philanthropy than most people see. I had to admit she had a point. Most visible philanthropists were wealthy people who donated portions of vast fortunes. The idea that middle-class people living on modest salaries could have significant philanthropic impact through intentional choices might indeed inspire others. I'll think about it, I promised. William approached with a legal folder. Eleanor, I've been reviewing the trust documents. The structures are remarkably robust, but there are some areas where updated language might provide additional protection against potential tax changes. Would you be open to some minor modifications? Before I could answer, Martha intervened. This is hardly the time for legal consultations, William. Eleanor's just been publicly recognized after 50 years of anonymity. Perhaps give her a moment. To breathe? William looked slightly abashed. Of course, we can discuss it another time. Martha gave me a meaningful look. I understood her concern. My family's sudden intense interest in the charitable trusts could be interpreted in different ways. Were they genuinely embracing the vision Thomas and I had established, or were they seeking to reshape it according to their own perspectives? As the afternoon progressed, I found myself at the center of an unexpected whirlwind. Community members continued to approach with thanks and stories. Local reporters requested interviews. Foundation board members sought my input on funding priorities. Through it all, my family remained close by, alternating between protective hovering and enthusiastic participation in discussions about the trust's future. By late afternoon, I was exhausted. Martha noticed immediately. "That's enough for one day," she announced firmly. "Eleanor needs to rest." To my surprise, it was Zoe who stepped forward. "I'll take Grandma home," she offered. "The rest of you can stay and network or whatever." Jennifer looked like she might protest, but Robert nodded. "Good idea, Zoe. Mom, is that all right with you?" I was touched by their consideration. "Yes, thank you. It's been a wonderful but tiring day." As Zoe and I walked toward the parking area, she slipped her arm through mine. "So, Grandma, how does it feel to be the talk of the town?" I laughed softly. "Surreal. For 50 years, your grandfather and I operated in the background. Being center stage isn't particularly comfortable." "But it's important," Zoe insisted. "People need to hear this story. It's like a completely different way of thinking about money and purpose." We reached Tyler's car, and Zoe helped me into the passenger seat. As she drove through the familiar streets of Oak Ridge, I found myself seeing the town through new eyes. The community center we had helped expand, the library with its children's wing, the hospital where so many lives had been saved. Thomas and I had left fingerprints all over this community, invisible until now. "Grandma," Zoe said tentatively as we approached my house, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear. Do you think Mom and Dad are disappointed? About the money, I mean, that it's all going to charity instead of to them?" The question was startlingly direct, but I appreciated her honesty. I think they're adjusting to a different understanding of their parents and our choices. It's a lot to process, because it seemed like they were calculating what they wouldn't be inheriting. Zoe persisted. "At dinner last night, and again today with all their questions about the trust structures." I sighed. "Your parents are practical people who value financial security. Finding out about these resources naturally makes them think about practical implications. That doesn't make them bad people." "I guess," Zoe conceded. "It's just, I think what you and Grandpa did is amazing. Living simply so you could help others. That's like actual values, you know? Not just talking about caring, but actually doing something significant." We pulled into my driveway, and Zoe cut the engine. "I wish I'd known Grandpa better," she said quietly. "He sounds like he was really special." "He was," I confirmed, "and he would have been very proud of your perspective today." Inside my modest home, everything looked exactly as it had that morning, yet somehow different. The worn furniture, the carefully maintained appliances, the simple decorations, all of these had been sources of concern or even embarrassment to my children. Now they stood as quiet testimony to a choice, a purpose, a vision that had guided 50 years of disciplined giving. Zoe looked around the living room with new appreciation. "It's kind of cool, isn't it? That everything in this house represents a conscious choice. Like you didn't just drift into this lifestyle by default. You chose it for a reason." "That's exactly right," I said, touched by her insight. Every choice to do without something here meant resources available for something more important elsewhere. Zoe helped me prepare a simple dinner, soup and sandwiches, and we ate at the kitchen table, discussing her college plans and her growing interest in nonprofit work. Around 7 o'clock, the rest of the family arrived, spilling into my small living room with unusual energy. "Mom, the foundation board wants to establish a formal advisory committee for the Thompson Legacy Fund," Jennifer announced without preamble. "They've asked if family members would be interested in participating. I've already offered some suggestions for optimizing the investment strategy," Robert added. "The current allocation is solid, but there are some newer vehicles that might enhance returns without increasing risk." William nodded. "And I've outlined some governance structures that would allow for family input while maintaining the original mission integrity." I exchanged glances with Martha, who had arrived with them. Her raised eyebrow spoke volumes about our shared concern regarding this sudden family enthusiasm for involvement. "I appreciate your interest," I said carefully. "But the trusts were established with specific purposes and governance structures. Thomas and I gave considerable thought to how decisions would be made after we were gone." "Of course," Jennifer said quickly. "We're not suggesting changes to the core mission, just offering our professional expertise to enhance what you've already built." I studied my children and their spouses. Their intentions might be genuine, but I couldn't help noticing how quickly they had shifted from criticizing my lifestyle choices to seeking involvement in the substantial resources behind those choices. Was this newfound respect for our vision, or simply recognition that the family's cheap matriarch had been controlling millions of dollars all along? "Before we discuss any changes to the trust governance," I said carefully, "I think we all need time to adjust to this new reality. The foundation has operated effectively for decades with its current structure." Robert looked ready to argue, but Martha intervened smoothly. "Eleanor's right. This isn't a business acquisition requiring immediate strategy revisions. The trusts are stable, the programming is effective, and there's value in understanding the existing operations before proposing changes." William conceded with a professional nod. "A reasonable approach. We should take time to fully understand the current structures before considering enhancements." Diane, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I still don't understand why you lived like this. All these years?" She gestured around my modest living room. "You could have helped others while still enjoying some comforts. It seems unnecessarily austere." The question hung in the air, direct and unapologetic. My first instinct was to defend our choices, but I realized Diane had articulated what my children had probably been thinking, but were now too cautious to express. "It wasn't about austerity," I explained. "Thomas and I found genuine contentment in simplicity. We didn't feel deprived. And practically speaking, every additional dollar we spent on ourselves was a dollar unavailable for the causes we cared about." "But surely you could have found a middle ground," Jennifer suggested. "Nice furniture doesn't have to be extravagant." I smiled slightly. What constitutes nice versus extravagant is relative, isn't it? My furniture is comfortable and functional. It serves its purpose. I never felt the need for more. "That's what I don't get," Robert admitted. "Most people want more, better, newer. It's human nature." "Is it?" I challenged gently. "Or is it conditioned response? Thomas and I discovered that after the basic necessities are met, additional possessions don't necessarily increase happiness. What did increase our satisfaction was knowing our resources were addressing genuine needs." Tyler, who had been quietly filming portions of our conversation, lowered his camera. "It's like minimalism, but with purpose. Not just having less stuff for the sake of simplicity, but redirecting resources intentionally." "Exactly," I nodded, pleased by his understanding. We didn't deny ourselves out of miserliness or fear. We chose differently because we found greater meaning in giving than in accumulating. Megan, typically absorbed in her phone, looked up with unexpected interest. So it wasn't about being cheap. It was about priorities. "Yes," I confirmed. And those priorities brought us genuine joy. The night we funded the first full scholarship for a student who couldn't otherwise afford college, we celebrated with a picnic in the backyard. It was one of the happiest evenings of our lives. Lucas spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Did you ever buy anything just because you wanted it? Something that wasn't strictly necessary?" I laughed. "Of course. Thomas had his workshop tools. I have my gardening supplies and books. We weren't ascetics. We just asked ourselves whether each purchase would bring lasting satisfaction compared to the alternative uses for those funds. Like a conscious spending philosophy," Zoe observed. "Intentional rather than automatic." "That's a good way to describe it," I agreed. The conversation continued into the evening. my family asking increasingly thoughtful questions about how Thomas and I had developed our philosophy, how we had selected causes, and how we had managed the practical aspects of our giving. For perhaps the first time, they seemed genuinely interested in understanding our choices rather than questioning or criticizing them. As the evening drew to a close, Robert approached me privately while the others were gathering their things to leave. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "All these years I interpreted your lifestyle as stubbornness or inability to adapt. I never considered it might be a deliberate choice based on values I didn't understand or appreciate." The admission clearly didn't come easily to him. Robert had always been confident in his judgments, reluctant to acknowledge mistakes. "We could have communicated better," I conceded. "But would you have understood? You and Jennifer chose different paths, different values. That's not wrong, just different." He considered this. "Maybe not when we were younger, but we're adults. Now, you could have trusted us with the truth." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But by then, patterns were established. You saw me as the penny-pinching mother who refused to enjoy life properly. I saw you as focused on material success and appearances. We both operated from those assumptions." Robert winced slightly at the accuracy of my assessment. "Well, I'm trying to see things differently now, and I'd genuinely like to understand more about the trusts and your vision for them. Not to change anything, just to appreciate what you and Dad created." His sincerity seemed genuine, and I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps this revelation might indeed bridge some of the distance between us. After everyone had left, Martha stayed behind to help tidy up. "Well," she said, straightening cushions with brisk efficiency, "that went better than I expected." "They're processing," I observed. "It's a significant adjustment to their understanding of their parents. And to their expectations," Martha added pointedly. "Discovering their cheap mother has been directing millions in charitable assets is quite a revelation. I'm still not entirely convinced their sudden interest is purely philosophical." "They're practical people," I defended. "Of course they're thinking about the resources and how they're managed. That doesn't make their interest insincere." Martha gave me a skeptical look. "Just be careful, Ellie. Family dynamics get complicated when money enters the picture, even money designated for charity." Her warning lingered in my mind as I prepared for bed that night. The day had been emotionally exhausting but also strangely liberating. After decades of quiet giving, having my choices understood, or at least acknowledged, by my family felt like a burden lifted. Yet Martha's caution resonated. My children were accustomed to taking charge, applying their professional expertise, shaping environments to their specifications. Would they truly respect the vision Thomas and I had established, or would they seek to remake it in their own image? The next morning brought a flurry of phone calls and visitors. The local newspaper had published a front-page article about the secret philanthropist of Oak Ridge, complete with photos from the ceremony and quotes from community members, whose lives had been touched by our giving. Friends and neighbors I'd known for decades called or stopped by, many expressing surprise and admiration. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" asked Helen Jacobs, my garden club friend of 15 years. "All those times we collected spare change for the food pantry, and you were funding entire programs." "It wasn't relevant," I explained. "The spare change collections were important too. Every contribution matters." By mid-morning, Gabriel from the foundation called, sounding slightly apologetic. "Mrs. Thompson, I hope you don't mind, but we've had numerous inquiries from people wanting to contribute to the Thompson Legacy Fund. Your story seems to have struck a chord. Would it be all right if we set up a dedicated donation portal on our website?" I hesitated. Thomas and I had never sought to inspire others' giving. We had simply followed our own conviction. But perhaps that had been a missed opportunity. "Yes," I decided. If others are moved to contribute, that would be wonderful. Shortly after noon, Jennifer arrived unannounced, carrying a laptop and several folders. "Mom, I've been thinking about the Foundation's communications strategy. They're doing fine with traditional donors, but your story has the potential to reach a completely different audience. Middle-class people who might not see themselves as potential philanthropists." I invited her in, curious about her thinking. Jennifer had always been perceptive about messaging and audience engagement. "The current narrative around philanthropy is dominated by billionaires," she continued, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "Gates, Buffett, Mackenzie Scott. But your story offers a different model. Ordinary people making extraordinary impact through intentional choices and disciplined giving." I had to admit she had a point. "What are you suggesting?" "A more comprehensive communication plan," she explained, showing me sketches and outlines. "Personal stories, practical examples of how small choices compound over time. Accessible, entry points for people at different income levels. The Foundation's current materials are designed for traditional wealthy donors. This would speak to a broader audience." Her enthusiasm was genuine, and her insights astute. This was Jennifer, in her element, identifying an opportunity, crafting a compelling narrative, developing a strategic approach. For the first time, I could see how her professional skills might genuinely enhance the work Thomas and I had begun. "These are good ideas," I acknowledged. "But I'm concerned about becoming too central to the message. Thomas and I never wanted personal recognition." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. But sometimes a personal story helps people connect with larger principles. Your choices, living simply, giving consistently, focusing on local needs, those could inspire others if shared appropriately. Not as self-promotion, but as a practical example of what's possible." We spent the next 2 hours discussing approaches that might honor the spirit of our giving, while using our experience to encourage others. By the time Jennifer left, I felt cautiously optimistic that her involvement might indeed bring value rather than disruption. Robert arrived shortly after. Jennifer departed carrying financial statements and investment prospectuses. Where Jennifer had approached from a communications perspective, Robert focused on financial optimization. "The current investment strategy is solid," he acknowledged. "But there are some newer vehicle options that might enhance returns or reduce fees without compromising the conservative approach." Like his sister, Robert was applying his professional expertise to an area he understood well. His suggestions were measured, respectful of the existing structure while identifying potential enhancements. I found myself increasingly open to the possibility that my children's involvement might indeed strengthen rather than undermine what Thomas and I had built. The pattern continued throughout the week. William stopped by with thoughts on governance, structures that might facilitate family involvement while preserving the original mission. Diane, after initially focusing on how I should upgrade my living arrangements, surprised me by suggesting a project to document the stories of families who had benefited from the trusts over the decades. My grandchildren, meanwhile, approached from entirely different angles. Tyler continued expanding his documentary project, interviewing community members and foundation staff about the impact of our giving. Zoe began researching how similar family foundations had managed intergenerational involvement. Megan, with her social media savvy, suggested ways to reach younger audiences with messages about intentional living and strategic giving. Even Lucas, the quietest of the four, contributed thoughtful questions about how decisions were made regarding which needs to address. By Friday evening, when Martha came for our weekly tea, I was both exhausted and cautiously hopeful about these developments. "They've all been here, one after another, with ideas and suggestions," I told her as we settled in my living room. "Sometimes I feel like I've unleashed an army of very well-intentioned consultants." Martha chuckled. "That's an apt description. Are they overwhelming you?" I considered the question. Not exactly. They're each applying their particular talents in ways that could be genuinely helpful. Jennifer's communication ideas are insightful. Robert's financial suggestions are sound. Even Diane seems to have moved beyond criticizing my lifestyle to engaging with the actual work. And you're comfortable with this level of family involvement? After 50 years of independent decision-making? I sipped my tea thoughtfully. I'm cautiously open to it. They bring perspectives and skills that could strengthen the Foundation's work. And perhaps more importantly, they're engaging with Thomas's and my values in ways they never have before. Martha nodded slowly. That's the real gift in all this, isn't it? Not just the public recognition or the continued charitable work, but the opportunity for genuine understanding between generations. Exactly, I agreed. For the first time, they're seeing our choices not as deprivation or eccentricity, but as purposeful decisions aligned with deeply held values. And are you seeing them differently too? Martha asked perceptively. The question gave me pause. Was I? Perhaps, I admitted. I've tended to see their focus on career advancement and material comfort as shallow or status-driven. But watching them apply their professional skills to enhance the Foundation's work has reminded me that they're also capable, intelligent people who can contribute meaningfully when engaged with something that matters. Growth all around, Martha observed. Thomas would be pleased. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. To my surprise, all 4 of my grandchildren stood on the porch, looking unusually solemn. Grandma, Tyler began once they were seated. In my living room, we've been talking, and we have something we'd like to propose. Zoe took over. We know our parents have been coming over all week with their ideas for the Foundation. Trust us, we've heard all about it, Megan interjected with an eye roll. And their ideas might be really valuable, Lucas added quickly. But we thought there should be input from our generation too. I exchanged glances with Martha. I'm listening. Tyler leaned forward earnestly. We'd like to establish a next-generation advisory committee for the Thompson Legacy Fund. Not with decision-making authority, but to provide perspective from younger community members on emerging needs and approaches. We've already spoken with Gabriel at the Foundation, Zoe explained. He thinks it's a great idea. Young people often see community needs that older generations might miss. And we're not just talking about the 4 of us, Megan added. We want to include other young people from the community, especially those who have benefited from the Trust's programs. We could help identify new areas for impact, Lucas suggested, like mental health resources for teenagers or environmental initiatives, things that will shape our generation's future. I was touched by their thoughtfulness and initiative. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Have you discussed it with your parents? The 4 exchanged glances. Not yet, Tyler admitted. We wanted to talk to you first, since it's your legacy. Our parents tend to take over, Zoe explained diplomatically. We wanted to make sure you were open to the concept before bringing them into the conversation. Their assessment of their parents' tendencies was amusingly accurate, but also showed astute awareness of family dynamics. I think it's an excellent proposal, I told them. Why don't you prepare a more detailed outline and we can discuss it with the entire family at Sunday dinner this weekend? After they left, bubbling with plans and ideas, Martha smiled knowingly. The 3rd generation often returns to the ice. Values of the first. They're more like you and Thomas than their parents are. They're finding their own way, I suggested. But yes, I see echoes of our values in their approach. The focus on community needs rather than organizational structure. The interest in inclusive decision-making rather than top-down expertise. Speaking of Sunday dinner, Martha said, Are you hosting again this weekend? That's becoming quite a regular event. I nodded. It seems to be evolving into a natural time for family discussion about the Foundation. I'm thinking of making it a standing arrangement, at least for now. Do you need help with preparations? She offered. Actually, Jennifer suggested a potluck format going forward. Everyone contributes something, which takes pressure off me and makes it more collaborative. Martha raised an eyebrow. Jennifer suggested sharing the work rather than hiring a caterer or taking everyone to a restaurant? That's progress. I had to laugh at her pointed observation. Small steps, Martha. Small steps. Sunday dinner proved to be a lively affair. Everyone arrived bearing dishes, some homemade, others from favorite specialty shops, and the conversation flowed easily around the dining room table. The atmosphere was notably different from the previous Sunday when I had revealed my secret. Then, shock and recalibration had dominated. Today, engagement and forward-looking discussion prevailed. When the grandchildren presented their next Generation Advisory Committee proposal, I watched my children's reactions carefully. Jennifer immediately began suggesting refinements to the structure. Robert questioned how the committee would integrate with existing governance. William raised points about liability and oversight. Zoe shot me a knowing look. This was exactly the parental taking over they had anticipated. But before I could intervene, Megan surprised everyone by calmly addressing each concern with thoughtful responses that showed considerable research and planning. We've looked at similar youth advisory models at other foundations, she explained. The most successful ones have clear scope parameters but genuine voice in identifying needs and evaluating impact from a youth perspective. Her articulate presentation seemed to catch the adults off guard. They were accustomed to seeing Megan as device-focused and somewhat disengaged. This poised, well-prepared young woman represented yet another adjustment to family perceptions. Gradually, the discussion evolved from parental questioning to collaborative problem-solving. By dessert, a workable framework had emerged for a youth advisory group that would provide meaningful input while connecting appropriately to the broader foundation structure. I'm impressed, Robert admitted as he helped clear dishes afterward. The kids have really thought this through. They care about getting it right, I observed, just like you and Jennifer do. He smiled slightly. I suppose we all want to honor what you and Dad created, in our own ways. Later, as the family gathered in the living room, the conversation turned to more practical matters. Jennifer and William would be traveling extensively for work in the coming months. Robert and Diane were considering a vacation home purchase that would require significant time and attention. The question of ongoing family involvement with the foundation hung in the air unspoken. Perhaps we should establish a more formal schedule, I suggested. Regular times for foundation discussions that accommodate everyone's commitments. That makes sense, William agreed. Consistency would help maintain momentum without creating undue pressure. Monthly family meetings focused specifically on foundation matters, Jennifer proposed, with clear agendas and preparation expectations. And the understanding that not everyone needs to be involved in every aspect, Robert added. We can divide responsibilities according to interest and expertise. I watched this planning unfold with mixed emotions. On one hand, their continued engagement suggested genuine commitment to the charitable work. On the other, I couldn't help noticing how quickly their approach had evolved from discovery to systematization. Where Thomas and I had operated with quiet flexibility, responding to needs as they arose, my children instinctively sought structure, clear parameters, defined roles. Before we get too deep into scheduling and structures, I interjected gently, I think it's important to revisit the core values that guided your father and me. Our approach was never primarily about organizational efficiency or strategic optimization, though those had their place. It was fundamentally about responding to human need with compassion and practical support. The slight shift in the room's energy told me my point had registered. Jennifer nodded slowly. You're right, Mom. It's easy to get caught up in process and forget purpose. Perhaps each family meeting should begin with a story, Diane suggested unexpectedly. a specific example of how the Foundation's work has impacted someone's life, to keep us grounded in the human element. Her suggestion surprised and touched me. That's a wonderful idea, Diane. Thomas and I always found that individual stories helped us maintain perspective when making decisions. As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic about this new chapter. The past week had brought adjustment and recalibration on all sides. My children were beginning to understand the principles behind choices they had long misconstrued. I was beginning to appreciate the valuable perspectives and skills they could bring to the work Thomas and I had begun. The following morning, I woke early and made my customary cup of tea, reusing yesterday's tea bag as I had for decades. The habit was so ingrained that I rarely thought about it anymore. But today, as I waited for the tea to steep, I found myself contemplating this small economy with fresh awareness. To my children, this practice had symbolized unnecessary frugality, perhaps even unhealthy scarcity thinking. To me, it represented one tiny link in a chain of choices that had collectively enabled significant impact. The few cents saved by reusing a tea bag were negligible in isolation, but multiplied across thousands of small decisions over decades. Such choices had facilitated millions in charitable giving. The doorbell interrupted my musings. It was early for visitors, barely 7:30. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Jennifer on my porch, dressed in running clothes and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mom, I hope it's not too early. I was out for my morning run and found myself in your neighborhood." "Not at all," I assured her. "Come in. Would you like some tea?" She followed me to the kitchen, watching quietly as I prepared a second cup, reusing my own tea bag to brew her portion. "You're still doing that," she observed, nodding toward the twice-used tea bag now resting on a small dish by the sink. "Old habits," I acknowledged with a smile. "But it's not just habit, is it?" she said thoughtfully. "It's practice aligned with principle." Her perception surprised me. Yes, exactly. Each small choice reinforces the larger purpose. Jennifer wrapped her hands around the teacup, her expression contemplative. "I used to find it embarrassing when you'd save bread bags or wash and reuse aluminum foil. I thought it reflected some kind of deprivation mindset from leaner times." "I know," I said gently. "But it wasn't that at all," she continued. "It was a deliberate practice of sufficiency, choosing enough rather than excess so resources could be directed elsewhere." Her understanding, articulated in her own words rather than mine, moved me deeply. "Yes. I've been thinking about this all week," Jennifer admitted, "about how I've oriented my entire adult life around accumulation and advancement. Bigger house, better car, more prestigious position. I've taught my children to value those same markers of success." "You've worked hard and achieved much," I pointed out. "There's nothing wrong with that." "No, but there's something missing," she said quietly. "A sense of purpose beyond personal acquisition. The kind of purpose you and Dad found in your giving." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "When Tyler showed me the interviews he conducted with scholarship recipients, something shifted for me," she continued. "These were real people whose lives changed direction because of choices you and Dad made decades ago. Generational impact that extends far beyond material possessions or career achievements." "That kind of impact was what motivated us," I acknowledged. "Seeing real needs and having the means to address them, even modest means, stretched through careful choices, gave our lives a dimension of meaning that we treasured." Jennifer nodded slowly. "I want to understand that better, not just intellectually but practically. I've been so quick to jump into organizing and strategizing for the Foundation, but I realize I need to better grasp the heart behind it first." Her vulnerability and self-awareness touched me deeply. What would help you understand? She considered the question. Would you be willing to show me? Not just tell me about your charitable work, but actually take me to see some of the programs, meet some of the people affected. I want to see this legacy through your eyes. The request was unexpected but deeply meaningful. I'd like that very much. Jennifer smiled, a genuine warmth replacing her usual polished expression. Thank you for being patient with us all as we adjust to seeing you and ourselves differently. After she left, I sat in my kitchen feeling a profound sense of hope. The past week had brought upheaval and adjustment, recalibration, and reconnection. My children were engaging with the values that had shaped Thomas's and my life choices in ways I hadn't dared to anticipate. My grandchildren were finding their own connection to these principles, perhaps more naturally than their parents had. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Gabriel from the foundation. Mrs. Thompson, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to let you know that since the Founders' Day ceremony, we've received over $50,000 in new donations to the Thompson Legacy Fund. Many are small amounts from community members who were inspired by your story. They often include notes saying they were moved by the idea that ordinary people can make extraordinary impact through intentional choices. The news brought tears to my eyes. Thomas had been right all those years ago when he suggested that someday our story might inspire others. I had resisted, valuing our privacy and avoiding recognition. But perhaps this public acknowledgement of our giving was bearing fruit in ways I hadn't anticipated. That's wonderful news, Gabriel. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else, he continued. A local business owner, Jim Barker from Barker Construction, has offered to establish a matching fund. He'll match all community donations up to $100,000 through the end of the year. Jim Barker. The name was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. That's extremely generous, I said. Please thank him for me. He specifically asked to meet with you, Gabriel replied. He said he benefited from one of your scholarship programs back in the 1980s, and it changed the course of his life. He's built one of the largest construction companies in the region and wants to pay forward the opportunity he received. Jim Barker. Suddenly I remembered, a promising student whose family couldn't afford trade school. Thomas and I had established a scholarship specifically for vocational education, believing that college wasn't the only valuable path to a productive career. Jim must have been among the early recipients. I'd be happy to meet with him, I told Gabriel. His matching fund is a wonderful way to amplify community giving. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a sense of wonder at how the ripples, from choices made decades ago, continued to spread outward in unexpected ways. Thomas and I had never sought or anticipated this kind of multiplication effect. We had simply tried to address needs we encountered with the resources available to us, stretched through intentional choices and careful stewardship. Now those choices were bearing fruit not only in the direct impact of our giving, but in the inspiration they provided to others. My children were engaging with values they had long misunderstood. My grandchildren were discovering meaningful ways to extend the legacy. Community members were finding their own paths to impactful giving, regardless of income level, all from choices that had once been dismissed as merely cheap. All from a philosophy of enough in a world fixated on more. All from the quiet, consistent commitment to living simply so others might simply live. The teacup in my hands, a plain white mug I'd used for 20 years, suddenly struck me as a fitting symbol. It wasn't fancy or impressive. It wouldn't draw admiration or envy. But it served its purpose perfectly, reliably, day after day. And in its humble sufficiency lay a kind of beauty that expensive china could never match. Thomas would have appreciated the metaphor. He had always found profound satisfaction in purposeful simplicity, not deprivation for its own sake. but intentional choices that aligned with deeply held values. Looking around my modest home with its carefully maintained furnishings and practical amenities, I felt not the embarrassment my children had assumed, but a quiet pride in choices that had enabled significant impact over decades. The doorbell rang again, this time revealing Tyler with his camera equipment. "Grandma, is it okay if I get some footage of you going about your normal morning routine for the documentary?" I laughed. "My normal morning routine isn't very exciting, just tea and toast and the newspaper." "That's perfect," he insisted. "I want to show how your ordinary, everyday choices connect to the extraordinary impact you've had. The contrast is what makes the story powerful." Once again, my grandchild had captured the essence of something I hadn't fully articulated myself. The power of our story wasn't in dramatic gestures or grand sacrifices, but in consistent, ordinary choices made with extraordinary purpose over time. "Come in," I invited him. "I'll show you how to properly reuse a tea bag." Tyler grinned, camera already rolling. "Starting with the small stuff. I like it." As he followed me around the kitchen, documenting what must have seemed mundane activities to anyone else, I found myself grateful for this unexpected chapter of life. After decades of quiet giving with Thomas by my side, I was now navigating a new phase of visibility and family engagement that I hadn't sought or anticipated. Yet within this unfamiliar territory, I sensed fresh possibility. The chance for deeper understanding with my children, meaningful legacy with my grandchildren, and perhaps even broader impact through inspiring others. Thomas had always believed our example might someday matter beyond the direct impact of our giving. Maybe, just maybe, he had been right all along. The weeks following Founders Day brought a rhythm I hadn't anticipated for my 80th year. Mondays became my day with Jennifer, visiting foundation-supported programs throughout Oak Ridge. Wednesdays, Robert would stop by with financial updates and thoughtful questions about Thomas's investment philosophy. My grandchildren rotated weekend visits, each bringing their unique perspectives and increasingly well-developed ideas for the Youth Advisory Committee. On a crisp autumn morning, Jennifer and I visited the Oak Ridge Children's Hospital Pediatric Oncology Wing that Thomas and I had helped establish decades earlier. Dr. Reeves herself led our tour, explaining how early funding had grown into a nationally recognized treatment center. "The initial grant came at a critical moment," she explained, leading us through bright corridors with colorful artwork. "We were losing promising researchers to larger institutions because we couldn't offer competitive fellowships. Your parents' funding changed that trajectory completely." She directed this last comment to Jennifer, whose expression reflected growing comprehension. We paused at a large wall display titled "Our Heroes," featuring photos of young patients who had battled cancer at the center. Dr. Reeves pointed to a faded photograph of a thin boy with a shy smile. "That's Michael Rodriguez, one of our first pediatric leukemia patients after the center was established. Today he runs the largest construction company in the region and sits on our hospital board." "Jim Barker," I murmured, the connection suddenly clear. Jennifer looked at me questioningly. "James Michael Rodriguez Barker," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "He uses Barker professionally, his stepfather's name. But yes, that's Jim." The little boy from the adjacent hospital bed, the child whose family's struggle had inspired our first steps into structured philanthropy, had grown into the successful businessman now offering a $100,000 matching grant. The revelation left me momentarily speechless. "Mom?" Jennifer prompted, noticing my expression. "Michael was the reason," I explained softly. "The very first family we helped was his. Their situation, parents unable to visit their critically ill child because of financial constraints. That was what started everything for your father and me." Dr. Reeves nodded. "I remember. The family lived hours away. We established the parent housing program because of cases like his." Jennifer's eyes widened with understanding. And now he's in a position to give back himself. Full circle, I agreed, feeling a profound sense of wonder at how lives intertwine across decades in ways we can never anticipate. As we continued our tour, Jennifer asked increasingly insightful questions about treatment protocols, research funding, and family support systems. This wasn't the polished marketing executive cataloging promising promotional angles. This was a woman genuinely seeking to understand how systems of care operated and where needs remained unmet. Later, over lunch in the hospital cafeteria, Jennifer had suggested eating there rather than at the upscale restaurant she would typically have chosen. She spoke with unusual candor. "I've been approaching this all wrong," she admitted. "I jumped straight into strategic planning and communication frameworks without really understanding the human realities these programs address." "That's natural," I assured her. "You applied the skills you've developed over your career." "Yes, but there's something more fundamental I was missing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Dads in your giving wasn't about organizational efficiency or maximizing impact metrics. It was about seeing real people in difficult circumstances and responding with practical compassion." Her understanding touched me deeply. Exactly. The systems and structures were important tools, but they were never the point. The point was Michael and his family, and thousands of others like them. "I think I need to recalibrate my approach," Jennifer reflected. "Less focus on optimizing foundation processes, more attention to understanding the actual needs these programs address." Her humility and self-awareness represented a significant shift from the daughter who had organized an intervention about my unhealthy relationship with money just weeks earlier. Something was evolving in her understanding, not just of my choices, but of her own values and priorities. Similar shifts were occurring with Robert, though in characteristically different ways. Where Jennifer sought direct experience with program recipients, Robert dove deep into the financial structures Thomas and I had established. Initially focused on optimizing returns and administrative efficiency, he gradually began asking more profound questions about the philosophy underlying our approach. "Dad's investment strategy was remarkably sophisticated," he observed during one of our Wednesday discussions. "Not just technically, anyone with training can understand diversification and risk management, but philosophically, he had a clear theory about capital deployment that prioritized specific social outcomes without sacrificing financial sustainability." "He spent years developing that approach," I explained. "Reading, researching, consulting with advisors who shared our values. It wasn't just about generating returns to fund charitable giving. The investments themselves were aligned with our priorities." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Like the early support for community banks offering microloans to local businesses, or the affordable housing developments. The investments themselves created positive outcomes while generating returns that funded other initiatives." Exactly. Thomas believed that how money is invested matters as much as how the proceeds are distributed. Every financial decision has impact, positive or negative. "That's not how most financial advisors approach wealth management," Robert admitted. "We focus almost exclusively on risk-adjusted returns. The underlying activities generating those returns are considered largely irrelevant unless a client specifically requests ethical screens." "Perhaps that represents an opportunity," I suggested, "to develop investment approaches that integrate financial and social objectives more holistically." The idea seemed to capture his imagination. Over subsequent weeks, he began researching what he called integrated capital deployment strategies, approaches that aligned investment activities with charitable objectives from the outset. "There's a growing field called impact investing," he explained one afternoon, spreading articles across my kitchen table. "But much of it still treats financial returns and social impact as separate metrics to be balanced. Dad's approach was more integrated, seeing these as inherently interconnected dimensions of the same capital deployment decisions. His engagement had evolved from technical optimization to fundamental questioning of financial paradigms. Like his sister, Robert was encountering principles that challenged his professional orientation in potentially transformative ways. My grandchildren, meanwhile, had made remarkable progress with their youth advisory initiative. Tyler and Zoe had recruited peers from local schools, including several past recipients of foundation scholarships. Megan had developed a social media presence highlighting youth perspectives on community needs. Even quiet Lucas had contributed substantially, creating a structured process for youth advisors to research and present funding recommendations. One Saturday afternoon, I attended their planning session at the community center. 15 young people between 16 and 22 sat in a circle, engaged in thoughtful discussion about mental health resources for teenagers in Oak Ridge. The existing programs are mostly crisis-oriented, a young woman named Amara explained. But what about preventative approaches, stress management, healthy relationships, identity development? These are universal needs, not just for teens in crisis. And the services that do exist are concentrated at the high school, added Riley, a community college student. What about young people who've dropped out or graduated? Where do they access support? Their analysis was astute, their engagement genuine. These weren't teenagers participating in a resume-building exercise. They were young citizens seriously considering how resources could address community needs. They understood intimately. Zoe noticed me observing from the doorway and waved me into the room. Grandma, we're mapping gaps in youth mental health services. Would you share how you and Grandpa approached identifying unmet needs in the community? I joined their circle, touched by the invitation. We started with observation and conversation, walking through neighborhoods, talking with people, volunteering at service organizations. Academic data and expert opinions matter, but there's no substitute for direct engagement with the community you hope to serve. The young people listened attentively, then integrated this perspective into their discussion. I noticed they didn't simply defer to my age or experience. They thoughtfully considered my input alongside their own insights, respecting both. Later, as the meeting concluded, Tyler approached with obvious enthusiasm. The Foundation Board has officially approved our Youth Advisory Committee structure. We'll have our first formal meeting next month, with a dedicated budget to research and recommend projects addressing youth needs. That's wonderful news, I told him. Your grandfather would be so proud of what you're creating. It's building on what you started, he replied, just adapting it for our generation. That phrase, adapting it for our generation, captured something essential about how the legacy was evolving. My grandchildren weren't simply continuing what Thomas and I had begun. They were interpreting core principles through their generational lens, applying values of simplicity, sufficiency, and purposeful giving in contexts we couldn't have anticipated. This multi-generational engagement culminated in an unexpected proposal from my children. Over Sunday dinner, now a weekly tradition rotating between our homes, Robert cleared his throat with unusual formality. Mom, Jennifer and I have been discussing how to honor Dad's legacy while supporting the Foundation's continued growth. He exchanged glances with his sister. We'd like to propose establishing the Thomas Thompson Memorial Fund within the Foundation structure, a dedicated pool of capital specifically supporting the kinds of grassroots, responsive giving that characterized your early work together. Jennifer continued seamlessly. The Foundation's success has naturally led to more structured programming and institutional partnerships. Those are valuable, but we don't want to lose the responsive, community-driven approach that made your giving so effective. We'd each like to make a significant initial contribution, Robert added, not to direct the Foundation's priorities, but to ensure that spontaneous relational giving remains part of its DNA. The proposal moved me deeply. It reflected genuine understanding of what had made our philanthropy meaningful. Not just the amounts given or programs established, but the responsive, relational approach that had allowed us to address needs as they emerged from community. Relationships. That would be a wonderful tribute to your father, I said, working to keep my voice steady. He always believed in meeting people where they were, responding to needs as they presented themselves rather than creating elaborate program frameworks first. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. As the foundation grows more structured, this fund would preserve the spontaneity and responsiveness that made your giving so personal and effective. We'd like the Grandchildren's Youth Advisory Committee to help identify recipients, Robert added. They're closer to the ground in many communities than traditional foundation processes can reach. The proposal represented remarkable evolution in my children's understanding. From initially questioning my frugality as misguided or irrational, they had come to appreciate and seek to perpetuate the underlying philosophy that had guided Thomas's and my choices. The weeks following that proposal brought further deepening of family engagement with the foundation and its work. William provided legal guidance for the new fund structure. Diane, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to interview early recipients of foundation support, creating an oral history archive that captured impact stories spanning 5 decades. Even more remarkably, I observed subtle shifts in my children's personal choices. Jennifer mentioned reconsidering the extensive renovation she and William had planned for their home, instead redirecting a portion of those funds toward the memorial fund. Robert spoke of involving his financial advisory clients in conversations about integrated capital approaches that aligned investments with values. These weren't dramatic lifestyle transformations. They weren't suddenly reusing tea bags or darning socks, but they represented meaningful recalibration of priorities and perspectives. The intervention they had staged about my unhealthy relationship with money had evolved into thoughtful examination of their own relationships with resources and purpose. The most profound conversation occurred on a quiet evening when Jennifer stopped by unexpectedly after work. She settled at my kitchen table, accepting a cup of tea brewed with my customary reused tea bag without comment. "I've been thinking about something you said during our hospital visit," she began. "About how you and Dad determined what was enough for your needs, allowing everything beyond that to be directed toward giving." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. That concept, enough, keeps resonating with me. In my world, there's never an enough. It's always about more growth, more achievement, more acquisition. Even charitable giving is framed around more impact, rather than sufficiency or contentment. Her observation reflected remarkable self-awareness. The idea of enough is countercultural, I acknowledged. But your father and I found it tremendously liberating. Once we determined what was truly sufficient for our needs, decisions became clearer. Anything beyond enough had greater purpose elsewhere. Jennifer cradled her teacup thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I even know how to determine what enough would mean for me. My default setting is perpetual expansion of career, home, experiences, possessions." "It's a worthwhile question to explore," I suggested. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. What truly contributes to your well-being and sense of purpose? What might be excess that depletes rather than enhances your life? "That's exactly it," she said with surprising vulnerability. "I'm beginning to question whether the constant pursuit of more, even more success, more achievement, is actually enhancing my life or diminishing it." We talked long into the evening about sufficiency, purpose, and contentment, concepts that had guided Thomas's and my choices, but that Jennifer was encountering as if for the first time. She didn't leave with answers, but with questions that seemed to animate her with genuine curiosity rather than anxiety. Perhaps the most unexpected development came from Jim Barker, the former Michael Rodriguez, who requested a meeting at my home rather than his impressive corporate headquarters. He arrived punctually. A tall man in his 50s with kind eyes that somehow still held echoes of the frightened 7-year-old I remembered from the hospital. He clasped my hands warmly as I welcomed him. "Mrs. Thompson, after all these years, I can finally thank you properly." "Please call me Eleanor," I invited, leading him to the living room. "And there's no need for thanks. Thomas and I were simply responding to a need we witnessed." "A need that changed the course of my life," he countered. "I've pieced together the story over the years, the gas cards and meal vouchers that allowed my parents to visit me during treatment, the scholarship that funded my vocational training, the startup grant that helped me establish my first contracting business. At every critical juncture, anonymous support appeared just when we needed it most." I smiled, neither confirming nor denying. Thomas and I had indeed continued supporting Michael's family over the years, watching from a distance as he overcame tremendous odds. "Your support wasn't just financial," he continued. "It preserved my family during a crisis that could have shattered us. My parents had 3 other children at home. Without the practical assistance that allowed them to be with me during treatment, they would have faced impossible choices." His understanding of the relational impact beyond mere financial support touched me deeply. That was always our hope, not just to address immediate financial needs, but to strengthen families and communities facing difficult circumstances. "That's precisely why I established the matching fund," he explained. "Not just to generate more donations, but to encourage the kind of responsive, relationship-based giving that characterized your approach. My company has a substantial charitable budget, but I've never found other foundations that operate with quite the same philosophy." Our conversation continued for over an hour, exploring how his construction company had integrated social purpose into its business model, providing apprenticeships for at-risk youth, developing affordable housing, prioritizing sustainable building practices. He had created his own interpretation of integrated capital deployment, though he hadn't used that terminology. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, I've achieved conventional success beyond anything my family could have imagined. But what I value most is being able to create opportunities for others facing obstacles similar to those my family encountered. That's the real legacy of your support. Not just that you helped one family, but that you inspired a perpetuating cycle of responsive giving." His words captured something essential about the impact of choices made decades earlier. Thomas and I had never anticipated that our decision to help one family would eventually generate millions in additional charitable resources through the life of the child we had supported. We had simply responded to a need before us with the key. Resources available to us, stretched through intentional choices about what constituted enough in our own lives. That evening, as I sat in my modest living room surrounded by familiar furnishings that had witnessed decades of quiet contentment, I felt profound gratitude for this unexpected chapter of life. The cheap lifestyle my children had once found, embarrassing or concerning, had been revealed as purposeful choice aligned with deeply held values. The secret philanthropy Thomas and I had conducted for 50 years had emerged into the light, generating not just recognition, but genuine understanding and engagement across generations. Most remarkably, our choices seemed to be sparking reconsideration of priorities and possibilities beyond our immediate family. Community members were contributing to the foundation at unprecedented levels. Jim Barker's matching fund had already generated over $70,000 in new donations. Local businesses were exploring how they might integrate social purpose more directly into their operations, rather than treating charitable giving as separate from core activities. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Gabriel from the foundation. "Mrs. Thompson, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening. I just wanted to share some news that I think would please you and Thomas." "Not at all, Gabriel. What's happening?" The Youth Advisory Committee's first formal recommendation was approved by the board today. They've identified a gap in mental health resources for teens and young adults, particularly those no longer connected to school-based services. The Thomas Thompson Memorial Fund will provide initial support for a new community-based program, offering both crisis response and preventative resources. "That's wonderful news," I said, deeply moved by this integration of my grandchildren's initiative with the memorial fund my children had established. "There's more," Gabriel continued. "The committee's research and presentation were so compelling that 3 local businesses have committed additional funding to expand the program's reach. One owner specifically mentioned being inspired by your story of purposeful giving, stretching modest resources through intentional choices." After we hung up, I sat quietly in the gathering dusk, watching shadows lengthen across my small backyard garden. Thomas and I had never sought this kind of recognition or multiplication effect. We had simply tried to live according to our convictions, making choices aligned with deeply held values about sufficiency, stewardship, and responsive compassion. Yet those quiet choices, sustained over decades, had created ripples we couldn't have anticipated, not just in direct impact through our giving, but in shifting perspectives about possibility and purpose across generations and throughout our community. This legacy transcended the millions we had donated or the programs we had established. It lived in my grandchildren's genuine engagement with community needs from their generational perspective. It lived in my children's evolving understanding of sufficiency and purpose in their own lives. It lived in Jim Barker's integration of social purpose into his business operations. It lived in community members recognizing that meaningful impact doesn't require vast wealth, just intentional choices about what constitutes enough and what lies beyond. Tomorrow, I would continue this journey, visiting programs with Jennifer, discussing investment philosophy with Robert, supporting my grandchildren's youth advisory initiatives, embracing this new chapter of visible engagement after decades of quiet giving. But tonight, in the gentle silence of my modest home, I simply sat with profound gratitude for how choices once dismissed as merely cheap had been revealed as purposefully, powerfully aligned with values that transcended conventional measures of wealth or success. Thomas had been right after all. Sometimes a story needs to be told, not for recognition or acclaim, but for the possibility it might help others imagine different choices, different priorities, different measures of what constitutes enough and what lies beyond. After 80 years of living frugally, my children had indeed called me cheap until they saw my charity donations. But the true revelation wasn't the money we had given away. It was the purpose and possibility embedded in choices sustained across a lifetime. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.